Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is going to be just a quick discussion. I say quick, a quick discussion of the upcoming counteroffensive or counteroffensives that the Ukrainians are going to execute. I'm just going to have a little discussion about what I think might happen, where I think these might happen. Remember, I am a rank amateur. This is just a random having a chat on the internet. I don't have the military experience or expertise, but I am just an armchair general, if you like, casting my opinion, and it just gives you an opportunity to throw about some ideas in your own head and have a little conversation in the threads below to see what you think, see whether you agree or disagree, and whether I'm talking absolute nonsense or not. First of all, I'm just going to throw out a couple of ideas that have been actually put down on my thread. So this first one this morning from Lil Bubs that says, I think we will see another Kharkiv counteroffensive in the north. Just to remind you, Kharkiv, here's my war map and map. I'll be using this as my main sort of map to draw on. So this is a Kharkiv area here, and I presume he means from sort of Kharkiv into the north of Luhansk there. So we'll see a counteroffensive in the north. My bet is the Russians are so paranoid about an attack in the south towards Melitopol and Mariupol that they have concentrated the main bulk of their defense there. Agreed so far. Ukraine has kept pushing the idea that they will attack at the south, making the Russians even more paranoid. They did this with Kherson and then attacked up in Kharkiv before. Then they will launch a surprise attack in the north in an attempt to push the Russians all the way back to the borders. I think Ukraine wants to cut off the Russian logistics right at the head. I'd agree that that is a good idea. They will try to establish fire control over the main roads and train lines and the main Russian border running across the east. That way the entire southern front will be cut off and will be forced to rely on the Crimean Bridge for supplies. This could be a long-term plan for Ukraine to essentially starve the Russians out of the south rather than directly attacking it, which would be disastrous for both sides. Now, this is something I've thought about before, and I was advocating for them attacking towards Starobilsk here previously because that is a supply hub. As you can see, the railway line comes down from Russia and feeds much of the east of Ukraine without having to go all the way around the side here and then come in from the east. So that would be a good option in principle. You'd cut the supply lines up there, cut these roads off around here. So essentially, you are really causing the Russians a bit of a supply issue. Now, whilst I thought that before, I don't necessarily think that anymore. I now think that, well, okay, let's talk about why I don't think that would be one of their main objectives. The main reason is that if you attack up the north here, what you are doing is you are opening yourself up to a massive front line, which then becomes really difficult to defend. So just by attacking into that northern Luhansk region, imagine that's what you take. You've now taken a front line that was this long and you've made it 3 times longer, which then means to defend that you need arguably 3 times as many forces. You need to dig all sorts of defenses, so on and so forth, mine a massive amount of space. Yes, you would cut off this here, the supply routes down into eastern Ukraine, and that would be a benefit. What I've said before is actually if you could do a smaller offensive that might take something like that, so then you can have your HIMARS sat here and you could absolutely hammer the logistics here, but you wouldn't need to take it. You basically make these GLOCs, these ground lines of communication, completely untenable, unusable. Sorry, I really mean Starobilsk here. If you take that out with HIMARS and destroy these roads and railway lines, and you can repeatedly do that once they fix them, take them out again, then you are doing the same job as taking it. Because other than Starobilsk, the rest of Luhansk is really open ground here in this part of Luhansk, and is not strategically valuable. It is not militarily valuable land. So my theory is that this would be the last place you would actually try and gain. whether you talk about the 2014 areas in Donbass as being, I don't know, but I would certainly say that this would be way down the list of what Ukraine would want to do, because it has very limited value outside of Starobilsk. Okay, so instead, what might be the option? Well, let's go and have a look at someone else's ideas, theories. This is Defective, who says, a text wall opinion of where the Ukrainian spring offensive may be directed. Okay, the recapture of the Ukrainian coast of the Azov Sea would likely end the war for Russia unless they were able to mount a military reply, which I think they are no longer capable of making. The Kerch Bridge can be targeted by a few different precision strike systems, and said coast, totally isolating Crimea and any remaining Russian occupied territory cut off by such an offensive. It would also present an existential threat to the Black Sea Fleet and a political loss from which it is questionable whether Putin's regime could ever recover. Ukrainian and Russian planners and commanders will be aware of this as well, obviously. So this is absolutely right, and you can already see that areas down here have a much greater military strategic value than this Luhansk area outside of Starobilsk. And so, although the Ukrainians might have telegraphed that they're going to go down here, I mean, you'd be stupid. You'd be a really rubbish Russian general if you didn't think that Ukrainians would see the value of this, right? So you might as well telegraph it, and they might do a feint. They might kind of use that as a feint to sort of attack somewhere else as well. But I don't think they would concentrate up here in the same way that they would concentrate down there, because the value for this coastal area is much greater, and I'll expand on that in a little while. As such, Russian commanders, will be looking to heavily defend this area. My assessment of the deployment of the T-55 and 54 tanks is that they would be deployed as indirect fire pillboxes along heavily mined and fortified defensive lines leading towards the Azov coast. It's a really good point. Something Perun mentioned in his video, saying, don't take the mickey out of using these tanks. These are basically guns, and they could just be used essentially as howitzers. They still have, decent enough guns. I'm happy to explain how this would work if desired, but it sounds pretty straightforward to me. Russian commanders would also seek to develop sufficient reserves to mount flanking counter-offensive attacks from the Melitopol on the one end and southern DPR against the Ukrainian flanks on the other in such an event. That lends another potential context for T-54 and 55 use, which is to replace more capable tanks elsewhere to equip such a reserve force. The deprioritization of using naval strike weapons would also make sense in this context. As such, a Ukrainian offensive would all but demand it was deployed to support defenses, presuming the Black Sea Fleet is even combat capable, which it may not be. Also, if Russia were to ever actually use tactical nukes in Ukrainian soil, questionable, but not impossible, the time and place would be this hypothetical Azov Sea offensive against what they must presume will be tightly massed ranks of Ukrainians, most well-trained troops, using their best Western equipment. All that said, and this is all really good points, I'm going to expand on this in a second. All that said, Russian commanders will absolutely expect the stretch between Zaporizhia and Vuhledar to be the point of attack for the spring offensive, and UA commanders and planners will know that it is what their enemy thinks. I've no insight or opinion onto whether, knowing this, Ukrainian commanders will still choose to make the Azov Sea direction their main push, but I would have to expect them to either try the same thing they did with Kherson Kharkiv, attacking towards Azov long enough to draw reserves from other Russian-occupied areas before making attacks elsewhere, or to simulate to the Russians that this was their intent and then make an overwhelming effort solely on Azov Sea coast, but pushing from multiple directions, including across the Dnieper. It's exactly what I was thinking myself. Both scenarios will look similar in their initial phase. If the Ukrainian leaders do this correctly, we won't be able to discern between these two options for a while. Ukraine would seek to maintain a total information dead zone till it was clear that Russian commanders had figured out the real attack. It's my expectation that only then will we see for ourselves how this goes. So on and so forth. Right. Okay. So much to talk about here. The first thing to do is to reiterate the strategic importance of this southern area. So if you, and again, there are questions as to whether you do two attacks, two kind of counter-offensives, or one big wide one. But my opinion would be you'd want to cut down there and you'd want to cut down there. I don't know that you want to attack cities directly. What you want to do is either encircle them or starve them of supply so that it becomes untenable to hold them. And this is my opinion for Crimea as well, incidentally. So I don't think it is worth attacking Crimea until you've taken all of this southern area here. So I would not be bothering with that, but I would be hammering it with long range ordnance to make it untenable to remain there. So coming down to the coastline and assuming you got a corridor as wide as that, then you could set up your long range munitions and take out Kerch Bridge there, which will then cut supplies that come up through Crimea and into this southern land bridge. But also you're cutting supplies back down from this land, from Russia, from eastern Ukraine, coming back down into Crimea. And that's really important, as well as cutting it off, all supply off, well, at least from the east. And if you took out the Kerch as well, to Kherson. So actually, you're starving this whole area. You could then, I mean, I'm now beginning to think mounting an attack across the Dnieper, if you could get that, would also be quite sensible. I don't know whether you do that at the same time. You would want not there to be more than one counteroffensive, and the reason is what indeed this commenter, the defective, was saying, which is if you are signposting that you're going to attack here, and it's pretty obvious you're going to attack from here because this has such high strategic value. If you're going to do that, then the Russians know, A, they know you're going to attack from there, so they can prepare for that, and B, if that's your only offensive, then you are going to concentrate all of your forces around here. And if you do that, the Russians are just gonna hammer this with every cruise missile, every ballistic missile they can get their hands on. They'll just absolutely hammer this area, and irrespective of whether there's one or two counteroffensives, this will be a worry because actually Russia's got nothing to lose here. They've got everything to lose actually, so they will throw the kitchen sink at trying to stop these counteroffensives, and that will include like absolutely blitzing these areas with the S-300s. Maybe Kinzhals, everything they can. That would be my opinion anyway. But nonetheless, Ukraine still need to counterattack. So it's going to have to be shaping the battlefields, trying to take out those kind of munitions, those pieces of equipment, so they can't do that. So finding where the S-300s are, taking them out, so on and so forth. We are seeing Melitopol being hit. We are seeing Mariupol being hit. We are seeing Volnovakha, Tokmak, loads of places around here. In fact, reporting from Ukraine did a video last night on how HIMARS have been really active right along this region here, which again is a sign that they are going to be using this as a place to counterattack. If you get down to Berdyansk and sorry, the coastline along here, I mean, Berdyansk would be a great city to take. It has economic value, and at least if Ukraine aren't going to be able to use that economic value themselves, they will be able to stop Russia from gaining economically from using it. So it's a kind of zero-sum game, but or actually not quite there. But nonetheless, I think they're less likely to get an attack from the sea. You might get attack from boats out here. I don't know, it'd be too risky because you can start getting harpoons and anti-ship missiles placed here. But if you go back up to doing this northern offensive and opening yourself up to a kind of cauldron that looks a bit like that, then you can be attacked from all directions. Whereas here, I think you can be attacked from two directions, but you're actually cutting off quite a lot from cutting the forces off here, so that they will be quite poorly supplied in order to hit a really significant counterattack back from the west. So I just think this has many great advantages to attacking here, and you might also see a surprise attack, as I say, from Kherson, because once you've done this, these Russian forces are somewhat starved of supply, and then you can send it across a significant force here to kind of try and mop up. It'll be much bigger than just mopping up, but to take this whole area from the Russians bearing in mind it also has really important targets such as the dam, the Novokokhovka Dam. You take that, you are stopping fresh water getting to Crimea. That's a huge issue, and that's one of the first objectives for the Russians. That was after they came out of Crimea, because they needed to resupply Crimea with fresh water for agricultural and living purposes. But then you've also got the Enerhodar nuclear power plant there. So this has really great strategic value all along here compared to Kharkiv, which I think really only has Starobilsk. And again, I repeat myself, but you could do a bit of a feint up here and take some, just at least get slightly to the east of Svatova here, and be able to hammer Starobilsk from a distance anyway. The problem I see with areas like this is the high density of settlements, and the same goes for Donetsk, Horlivka as well. That I think if you are going to counter attack or do a counter offensive in these areas, it will be really, really difficult. You might be able to take advantage of the fact that the Russians have exhausted themselves in Bakhmut and do a counterattack around there. You could maybe try out some feints and so on and so forth. But essentially, I really do think the Zaporizhia area is going to be your main area to attack, and then from here you could just hammer the cities or the targets, the important targets in and around Melitopol and Mariupol, so that it becomes untenable for the Russians to continue to hold these in any significant way. And as I say, if you're then clearing out Kherson, the great thing about taking this land back here is that the Russians can only really then attack from two very small isthmus in the area. So if I bring that back up, just clear that up, I think this is super, super important. So if you've done this land corridor down to there, and then you take back all of this area, imagine they've done that. I mean, goodness me, easier said than done. But basically, the Ukrainians are then only able to be attacked by land here and here, which is then really easy to defend against. You just absolutely hammer you make sure that these two passageways, these two G-locks, I guess, are absolutely covered by artillery and whatnot. And then it becomes, I would not go into Crimea. I would just hammer Crimea, do exactly the same as I suggest doing up in Starobilsk, take out Jankoy repeatedly. It depends what the distance is. I might have to check that out on my other map, how far things like HIMARS can get. But you would hope that with slightly longer range munitions that they do have, you've got the use of JDAM, ERs, as well as GLSDBs and stuff like that. You could start, taking out places in Crimea and continue to attack Sevastopol with drones, naval drones and aerial drones. Yeah, you're going to use up a load of drones, and most of them won't get through. But it's like the Russians do with the Ukrainians: is you send 100 different forms of aerial munition in the hope that 15 get through, and those 15 do significant damage to the energy infrastructure in Ukraine. Well, you take that kind of approach and you hammer Sevastopol. Already you've seen a movement of the navy out of Sevastopol to the Russian shallow port on the Russian in Russia here, and not in this Crimean occupied territory. So they aren't using Sevastopol to its fullest potential for sure. But that would be that would be the sort of approach I would take. It's all about the southern land bridge, whilst also hopefully taking out the G-lock from Starobilsk, so that the east becomes somewhat starved or much more difficult to supply. And then it's a case of, okay, we're back to, well, we're not back to 2014 levels, because it might look something like that. It might do a bit of a counter attack around there. And the question is, okay, how do we get Crimea? We make Crimea untenable, and then we go to the negotiation tables, or we keep getting given equipment, because the amount of equipment that the West are giving them at the moment, that won't last all that long. They're going to exhaust an awful lot of equipment doing maneuvers like this. And so you would need just an absolute bucket load of more mechanized equipment and ammunition to continue that kind of momentum. They won't be able to go on forever. So my guess is, I mean, it could be that they get exhausted after just doing that, and that's going to take an awful lot of effort and resources to take that kind of land bridge. But I don't know. But then the idea is that you then consider what you do about the rest of this Donbass area, and whether you'd be able to, because then the Russians might themselves be in a position to do a counteroffensive. I don't know whether they will be able to. Let's be honest. They have mainly mobilized troops to throw at the problem, and they could do some mass mobilization. They could do a forced national mobilization, but they're still going to be throwing untrained, poorly equipped soldiers at a problem. And remember that Ukraine still have plenty of elbow room for their own kind of mobilization. They haven't done forced mobilization in a way that people might have expected. So there's a lot of potential left within Ukraine. It's just about equipment and deep pockets, and how long and how far their allies, the Ukrainian allies, are willing to go to win this war for Ukraine, or with Ukraine. Yeah, those are my thoughts initially. It depends where you do this other attack. So if you do this land bridge as your main objective, do you do an attack up the north? Do you do one in the Kherson area, or do you do one in Bakhmut, or kind of smaller ones along all of them? They've said that they've only got enough to do two. Previously, they've said I think Zelensky said we've got enough to do two counteroffensives, and then really defend. But could they squeeze out one big counteroffensive and a couple of smaller ones? I don't know. Let me know what you think. That's just my stream of consciousness thoughts about potentials for counteroffensives. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll catch you later.